Hi, Pancake. How's it going?
I'm good. Everything is fluffy.
That's good. So is there anything you want to talk to me about today?
I was wondering, what are cryptids and are they real?
Now, that's an interesting one. Hopefully, a more fun one than what we've done so far. Maybe this one won't irritate people and get as many people as mad at me. So let's dive into it. Take a look, and we'll roll the titles. Cryptids are basically animals reported to exist, but that have not yet been verified by science. Honestly, the term cryptid has probably received a somewhat undeserved connotation over time due to the overzealous enthusiasm, lack of professionalism, and lack of objectivity seen in the people that research them. Cryptids aren't necessarily fantasy make-believe creatures, although they can be. Though I am highly skeptical of the existence of most of them, not all of them are ridiculous, and some former cryptids have been confirmed as actual real animals. Let me be clear about my skepticism, because believers may be quick to assume that I'm closed-minded to things like aliens, the paranormal, big feet, and so on, but that isn't true. I'm open to all these things, and I'm even interested in these things, but I need compelling evidence to convince me. Again, as I've already acknowledged, there were animals that were formerly categorized as cryptids that were later confirmed to be true. A few of the many examples of these include the mountain gorilla, the okapi, giant squid, the devil bird, and the kangaroo. When one looks over a list of former cryptids confirmed to be genuine animals, they generally don't seem to be particularly interesting, often variations of other animals that we already knew. For example, mountain gorillas are very similar to other primates that we already knew about. Giant squid are similar to non-giant squid. I think that the likelihood of any of the currently listed cryptids being real largely depends on how mundane they are. The more far-fetched creatures bearing little to no resemblance to known animals seem far less likely. Having said that, I can't rule out the possibility that some of the more ridiculous-sounding cryptids might not actually be so ridiculous if we'd actually been able to confirm them, that perhaps they only seem ridiculous because of the wording of their description. For example, I've already mentioned kangaroos being former cryptids that have been confirmed as real animals. If you'd never seen a kangaroo before and all you had to go off of was a description, they sound preposterous. Imagine what a creature would look like if all you had to go off of was the head of a deer on a body that walks upright like a man but hops like a frog. And sometimes they have a second head protruding from their bellies. That sounds like something from some fantastical kids' fantasy book, but it's a kangaroo. Obviously, the second head comes from when they're carrying their young in their pouch. Still, I feel like the less outlandish the cryptid, the more plausible it becomes. Still, cryptids could be improbable for other reasons. As an example, just the other day I had seen a short article with a photograph of an alleged lake monster in a Pennsylvania lake. The creature, known as Raystown Ray, is reported to have been spotted in Raystown Lake. Regardless of whatever the creature may allegedly be, there's, for me, a glaring problem raising very serious doubts about the possibility that it could even exist in the first place. Specifically, the lake is man-made, not very old, and nowhere remotely near any other major large bodies of water. So the monumental problem here is, how could it even have got there? The lake is 32 miles long and up to 200 feet deep, so it's plenty spacious for a lake monster. The problem is the first dam was only built in 1905, and the lake wasn't completed until 1973 by the Army Corps of Engineers. This means that it's not an ancient lake that could have something from millions of years ago living in there. It's also nowhere remotely near any major large bodies of water from which it could have migrated to the lake, as it's right in the middle of Pennsylvania, in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. This means that if there's to be a large lake monster there, somebody deliberately put it there.
Do you think believers will try to argue with you?
Oh, of that I have no doubt. As I already said, I'm personally interested in stuff like this, and I've been on different websites and Facebook groups for stuff like this. So I have plenty of experience and history dealing with people that believe in these sorts of things, and they lack any shred of objectivity and affectionately embrace anything that even remotely suggests something of a cryptid. In the case of Raystown Ray, I can hear them in my head arguing with me that maybe somebody did put it in the lake. This irrational stubbornness from the community makes it difficult to have a serious discussion about this sort of thing, and it makes cryptids to outsiders appear like just a big joke. Okay, yes, fine, technically, I guess somebody could have happened to have a lake monster handy in personal, private captivity, and kept it a secret from everybody because reasons, and then relocated it to this lake because reasons? It's technically possible, but it's ridiculous. I would imagine that anybody remotely sane at this point would agree with me that that never happened. So I guess technically it's possible as maybe a 0.000000001% chance that this could have happened if somebody did this, but realistically, it never happened.
I'm gonna need about 350.
Now I'm going to go from an obscure one that maybe only 5 people have ever heard of, and that we've pretty well established can't possibly be real, to what is arguably the most famous of the cryptids. Because it's been sighted seemingly virtually everywhere that there's humans, pretty much every continent, I guess, except for Antarctica, he's known by so many names: Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yowie, Grassman, Skunk Ape. There's also the Yeti, and there's a bunch of names I'm not going to try to pronounce. I don't want to butcher them. Of all of them, I feel that maybe this one is the most plausible. That's because, as I've already touched on, he's closest to stuff that we know actually already exists. According to common descriptions of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, it sounds like it's very similar to great apes that currently exist, like the gorilla. But depending on how ape-like you go with the description of him, he seems somewhere in between a great ape like the gorilla and a human, both of which are things that exist. Possible explanations for the Sasquatch include earlier humans that, as far as we know, no longer exist. But then there's also different great apes that used to exist but no longer do as far as we know, like Gigantopithecus. My problem with big feet isn't whether or not a creature like that could exist. We know that they can because they have existed and do exist. My doubts are more practical. 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, maybe even just 100 years ago would have been different. Today, there's just too many people spread in too many places. There's 8 billion of us, in fact. Just about anywhere that is remotely hospitable, there you will find people. Even if you point to a spot where there's technically no people, it's rarely very far from where there are people. Even if there aren't people there at all times, there's usually at least roads crisscrossing everywhere, with people at least passing through once in a while. It's hard for a massive ape or similar creature to find very much habitable space without running into people all the time. You could argue that maybe this is why people do spot them, because they are running into us. But what I mean is, it shouldn't be just the rare occasional encounter here and there, maybe with a crappy photo. I feel like we should have lots of good photos and videos of them by now. Everyone has a camera on them at all times today. Many of us have ring cams, trail cams, and there's surveillance systems everywhere. Why don't people occasionally hit one with their car like a deer? Where's all the dead bodies? In fairness, I live in an area with tons of deer, and I occasionally see the deer, but I think I've only ever once ran into a dead deer just laying in the woods. Still, it seems like definitively proven their existence should have been over and done with by now. Admittedly, they'd probably be smarter than most animals, and would probably be better at avoiding humans than other animals are. It's not just space and avoiding us though, it's also food. I've seen programs where an alleged expert sits there telling the camera that twigs and berries are plenty of food for a squatch. If it was a deer, maybe. Twigs and berries would be perfectly fine for a deer. When last I checked though, Bigfoot was not a deer. Great apes and humans and similar creatures need much more nutrition than what you can get from leaves and pine needles. There are places that would be much better for them than that, with all kinds of fish and animals to eat. But I've seen professional douchebags stand there with a straight face, talking about how like Sasquatches are going to survive just fine off of a diet of pine cones. Now I'm not a zoologist, so I ran to Google for some assistance. And what I got was that an adult male gorilla, especially a silverback, lives on a diet of 5,000 to 6,000 calories per day. Now, while a gorilla and a Sasquatch are not the same thing, I think that we can agree that a gorilla is probably the closest known animal that we can get to a Sasquatch to give us some kind of a ballpark idea of what its dietary needs would be. A gorilla can grow to be roughly the same height as a human, but they're much bulkier in the chest and arms, so I don't know how that compares to a Sasquatch, but most descriptions of Sasquatch puts him taller than a human, so I feel like it's safe to assume that he probably needs at least as many calories as a gorilla. I could really counterpoint this all day, but I can't honestly completely rule them out, which is why I say they're probably the most plausible of the cryptids.
What about other cryptids?
That's a good question. Let me move on to one of my personal favorites as a kid. Growing up as a big fan of dinosaurs, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, so I'm going to try it one time. Mokele Mbembe. I actually researched the pronunciation of that, and there's silent letters and all kinds of stuff, and I'm not going to try that again. From here on out, I'm giving him officially a new nickname, and that's what I will refer to him as. I will call him Mk. For those unfamiliar with Mk, locals in the Congo describe it as being a massive, hulking quadruped with a long neck and a long, powerful tail. What they describe and the way they describe it, it sounds an awful lot like a sauropod dinosaur. Now, of course, the obvious problem here is that dinosaurs, as far as we are aware, have all been gone for like 66 plus million years, depending on what species you're looking at. Of course, that doesn't mean that it can't still exist, just look at the coelacanth. Now, an obvious problem here is how it managed to survive the extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous. 75% of all plants and animals on Earth perished. But who knows, maybe not 100% of dinosaurs were wiped out. If some sauropods in what is now Africa did manage to survive, the Congo should be a terrific place for them to hide today. A major problem with not yet having confirmed the existence of a creature so large that locals describe it as blocking the flow of rivers is that it seems like something so large should be pretty difficult to miss. However, the Congo is 1.4 million square miles of dense rainforest. That's an area 5 times the size of Texas. A great deal of that rugged wilderness is unexplored, although I can't find any concrete percentage figures on that. Over the decades, I've seen footage of locals being interviewed about Mk, and they seem sincere and have no logical or evident reason to fabricate stories about it. However, I don't speak their language, and I have no way of knowing how honest or accurate interpretations have been. Interestingly, the locals are afraid to go anywhere near it. If it's in a river, they refuse to fish until it's gone. If someone ends up in a river, nobody's going after them for fear of their own lives. They portray Mk as aggressive and describe it as attacking hippos and elephants. It isn't for food though, as it's an herbivore. It seems to be more about being territorial. Some descriptions give Mk a horn like a rhinoceros. Though no sauropod fossils have had horns, there may have been species as of yet undiscovered, and 66 million years is plenty of time to evolve a horn. However, the horn leads to theories that the locals are misidentifying something like the rhinoceros, mistaking it for something else. It's also been suggested that locals are misidentifying other things like the hippo or elephant. The counter-argument that I've heard to that is that locals are familiar with those things and they know the difference and are insisting that it is not one of those things but something else entirely. Now, I often lean towards theories of misidentification, misunderstanding, but I'm not sure how they're getting the really long neck and really long alligator-like tail out of any of those creatures. I suppose maybe the trunk of an elephant could be seen as a serpentine-like neck, but you'd think that they would notice that the body that the neck is coming from has a face, and that the end of the trunk doesn't have a face. So I don't know about this one. I have mixed feelings about it. It is technically plausible, but it would have to have somehow managed to survive an extinction event that killed off almost every major creature on the planet. And we're talking about a really large creature somehow managing to evade being detected and proven by modern society. And there's the possibility of misidentification.
What about Nessie? Can we do that one?
Ah yes, the Loch Ness Monster, Nessie. One of the two most famous of all the cryptids that everybody thinks of whenever you bring up the subject. I didn't want to jump to Nessie too early because I'd already previously obliterated another lake monster. Like Raystown Lake, Loch Ness is very long, not quite as long, but it is a lot deeper. A problem with Raystown Lake was that it was laughably young, a problem that Loch Ness does not have. However, Loch Ness is still only 10,000 years old, so depending on what you want to believe that Nessie is, if you want to believe it's something from the dinosaur era, then it suffers the same problem that we had with Mk, as well as how did it end up in a lake that was not there millions of years ago. But unlike Raystown Lake, Loch Ness isn't terribly far from the sea. So I have heard people argue that the Loch Ness Monster did migrate there from the sea. So skipping past all the debate about what Nessie is, how Nessie could have got there, I'll jump straight into what is for me a major problem with Nessie. And that's how can something so big even live there in the first place? Yes, the lake is big and there are fish in it, but Loch Ness is a crappy lake. It is a very cold lake, even in the summertime, and it is a very dark, murky lake because of all the peat in the area. And despite the fact that there are technically fish there, there's not nearly enough to support something big like that, especially a population of them. And there would have to be a population of them. Sightings go back centuries, so there can't be just one of them in there. And when I say population, I don't mean a few. I don't mean like a small family of them. I mean dozens, maybe hundreds of them. And if you want to specifically subscribe to the belief that it is something Mesozoic like a plesiosaur, then you're talking about something that is going to have to come up for air on occasion, kind of like dolphins and whales. This means that we're going to see Loch Ness monsters popping their head up all the time. And another problem that Nessie faces, if we're to believe that it is a plesiosaur or something like that, and that seems to be the prevailing opinion, is that Nessie keeps getting depicted as having like a flexible serpentine-like neck, but no plesiosaur had that kind of flexibility in its neck. Granted, maybe it's possible that over millions of years it developed that kind of flexibility, but we don't have any reason to assume that it definitely did. All that we'd have to base that on would be the desire for reality to match what we see in photographs. Now, speaking of photographs, what about the photographic evidence? Well, here we see the most famous of all the Nessie photographs, the so-called surgeon's photo, which was later discovered to have been a hoax. It turned out that it was just a dinosaur neck attached to a toy submarine. This becomes quite a bit more evident whenever you see the unedited, uncropped photograph. Now we can see it for how tiny it really was.
Are there any other photographs?
Well, yes, Pancake, there are. And man, dude, they suck. For example, as far as I'm aware, this is the first alleged photograph of Nessie. Or some fisherman in a rowboat. Or a wave crossing the surface of the lake. Or a log floating in the water. Or maybe a ham and cheese sandwich. Here's this wonderful photograph that definitely has something. And then here we can clearly see a thing. Maybe we're seeing the head of Godzilla poking up out of the water on his way to the shore. Although it could be an otter, or it could be a log. But regardless of what Nessie is and how it got there allegedly, for me the biggest single insurmountable problem is that the lake just can't support something like that. As long as that enormous hurdle remains, I just don't see how the rest of it even matters. Loch Ness simply does not have enough biomass to support any kind of a population of big creatures. Now rest assured, I want Nessie to be real, but that just doesn't seem realistic to me. However, the Loch Ness Monster isn't the only alleged lake monster in the world, some of which don't suffer the same hurdles that the Loch Ness Monster does. Now, while I had lumped all the variations of big feet together, because honestly big hairy ape men are seen literally everywhere, big lake monsters aren't seen universally in every single lake around the world. And each of them has their own descriptions and their own story to tell. So while I feel like I definitively shot down Nessie, some of the other ones might have more of a chance. As a couple of examples, I was a little bit more optimistic about Ogopogo in Okanagan Lake in British Columbia, Canada, and Champ or Champy in Lake Champlain along the border of New York State and Vermont. At the very least, those lakes didn't seem to be as crappy as Loch Ness and seemed to be a little bit more at least abundant with fish. However, Google's AI seems to disagree and suggests that it is doubtful that either of those lakes has quite enough fish to support a population of large aquatic sea monsters. The reason that I was more optimistic about either of those lakes, at least as far as diet is concerned, is that both of those lakes have at least some decent sized fish in them. Lake Champlain, for example, has lake sturgeon, which can grow to be 7 feet in length. Now granted, 7 feet is a far cry from 15, 20, 30 feet, but it's not tiny and it's finding something to feed off of. According to the information that I've dug up, Okanagan Lake looks even better. Not only is Okanagan Lake really huge, but it also has some pretty large white sturgeon in it. White sturgeon are evidently even bigger, and from what I've gathered, the modern record is over 11 feet in length, but in the past they've been known to get up to 20 feet. Unfortunately, the fact that there are fairly decent sized fish in both of those lakes, that gives us a pretty good candidate for what people might be seeing. Maybe champ and ogopogo are just sturgeon. I feel like that's enough fish tails for now. How about we dry off and move to something else?
Like what, Yeti?
Well, we've done land and water. How about we take to the skies? While the big hairy ape man sightings seen all around the world are relatively similar, and the assorted lake monster sightings are slightly more diversified but usually come down to a couple different types, the sightings of flying creatures seems to be a little bit more all over the place. They range from the relatively mundane, basically just giant birds, to the absurd. Let's start with the more mundane. As I think I've firmly established by now, I think this makes it the most plausible of all of them. I don't think they have an awful lot of interesting names for them, but the one that I like is Thunderbird. Now, the name Thunderbird comes specifically from Native American folklore, in which it is typically depicted as either a giant bird of prey or maybe a hybrid bird/human. Native depictions of the Thunderbird have been found as far back as at least 4,000 years ago. It's typically given powers over thunder and lightning, thunder from flaps of its wings, and lightning from its eyes. Now, obviously, while the supernatural powers aren't very realistic, the part about being a bird of tremendous size is less far-fetched. Argentavis magnificens, if I didn't butcher that pronunciation, or the magnificent Argentine bird, had an estimated wingspan of around 20 feet, some estimates up to 23 feet. As far as we know, they've been extinct for 6 million years, but we have found things that we thought were extinct before. Just again, look at the coelacanth. Today, there are several species of condor, pelican, and albatross with wingspans of 10 to 12 feet, depending on which species we're talking about. So there are some pretty decent sized birds today. I think it's easy to imagine somebody just going through their daily routine and running across a bird with a 10 to 12 foot wingspan being startled. Now, if somebody happens to be spooked by seeing one of these, it's easy for their imagination to envision it much larger than it already actually is. Not that a 10, 11 foot, 12 foot wingspan isn't already big to begin with. But what about something that's genuinely much larger than a 10-foot bird? Well, we do know that such creatures definitely did exist in the past, which means that if they existed before, they could exist now, and maybe some of them didn't go extinct. When we were looking at the lake monsters, they're limited to whatever body of water they're inhabiting, and they're limited to whatever food happens to be in that body of water. Birds, on the other hand, have the whole sky. I mean, they could fly wherever they please, whenever they please. But the one concern I really have with these is their immense size. When we look back at, yes, it is big, but it also has a really good hiding place in the jungle. But here we're talking about a bird the size of a small airplane, and you'd think something like that would be a little bit conspicuous flying by. There have been sightings reported, though, just not nearly as many as I would imagine with something so big and hard to miss. I have read up on a lot of these sightings, though, and I find it interesting to read about. Back in the 1890s, in Pennsylvania and Arizona, opposite ends of the country, there were reports of large birds with bat-like wings and heads like an alligator. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds like they're trying to describe a pterosaur. Now, as we've already addressed, that is technically plausible or possible. I guess I can't rule that out, but I think it's a lot less likely. But reports from back in the 1890s allege that some of these had been shot down. Now, in the 1970s, there were a lot of reports out of Illinois. One in particular I found particularly interesting, and I would like to circle back around to that here in a minute. In 2002, there was a sighting in Alaska with the bird described as having a wingspan similar to a small plane. and this allegedly led to authorities recommending that people stay indoors for their own safety. There was an incident in 2013 in California, and in 2018 we returned to Alaska, where a bird was described as being as wide as the road. Now, from the 1800s all the way up to today, the Pennsylvania wilds have produced a lot of reports. However, this region has trumpeter swans, which can be fairly large, supposedly up to 10 feet in wingspan. Now, I've already mentioned that the imagination can run wild when we're spooked, but also when something is up in the sky and there's nothing near it for reference, or even if it's sitting on a lake or flying over top of one, it's hard for us to accurately judge scale. So, without having a person or a car or a banana next to it for scale, it's hard to say whether it's 10 feet or 20 feet or 50 feet. Now, I said we'd circle back around to a 1970s Illinois incident, so let's do that. Back on Monday, July 25th, 1977, at about 8:30 p.m., a 10-year-old boy in Lawndale had an experience that I'm sure he'll never forget. Now, I'll refrain from using his name, but it's on the internet. Now, the story isn't long or complicated, but the gist of it is that the boy was attacked by two large birds right in his own backyard, and one of them allegedly even picked him up, and it only dropped the boy when his mom came to the rescue and kept beating on the bird. Now, as interesting as this is, for me it sounds a bit far-fetched. For the kid's mother to come to the rescue and repeatedly beat the bird, I don't know, I'm just sitting there imagining it in my mind, and this couldn't have been like an instantaneous sort of a thing. This should have been dragged out for at least, a few minutes maybe. So you're telling me that all this time that bird was just lingering there, absolutely committed to carrying off this boy? I mean, when you see a bird of prey swoop in to grab a mouse or whatever it is, it's a really quick thing. It doesn't just like hang out there for a couple minutes, fighting with whatever it is it's trying to carry off. But here we have it lingering for long enough that the mom was able to see that her son was under attack and run to the rescue and repeatedly beat the bird. But we have this problem with proving a negative, and we can't really do it. I can't say it definitely didn't happen. But if it did happen, picking up a boy that, depending on whose version of the story you go with, was somewhere around 50 to 65 pounds, I mean, that's a pretty incredible haul for a bird. Having established this isn't unrealistic. Golden eagles will pick up and carry off mountain goats and drop them to their death. Golden eagles are pretty good-sized and powerful birds, but I don't know that they can pick up adult mountain goats, and I don't know that they can actually fly upwards with them. I've just seen them haul off the mountainside and drop off a cliff. So, okay, it's plausible that a really large bird could have tried to pick up and carry off a boy, a 10-year-old boy. But it would have to be a pretty good-sized and powerful bird. So, is there anything that matches this description in or around Illinois? Well, no. Officially, the largest bird known to be in or around Illinois is the great blue heron. Now, it is a decent-sized bird with a wingspan up to about 6.5 feet, but it isn't a bulky, husky, muscular bird. They are opportunistic predators, but the stuff that they eat are fish, lizards, snakes, frogs, insects, nothing big. I can't see a great blue heron carrying off a small child or even thinking about it. And if it was going to attack somebody, it would probably do it with that long, skinny, sharp beak. Now, as I said, I do like this story. It is interesting to me because most of the sightings are just a sighting, whereas this, you have an actual interaction with it and with more than one person involved. But from what I can gather, it's really just the one boy's account of everything that we're going off of, and how honest and reliable are 10-year-old boys. And he doesn't even have to deliberately be telling tall tales. Kids have wild imaginations, and we've already established that memories aren't reliable. Even adult memories aren't reliable, and we're talking about a 10-year-old. But of the flying cryptids, at least this one's remotely plausible because it's basically just a bird, but bigger than usual. Now, towards the other end of the spectrum, we have the Jersey Devil. Just look at this stupid piece of crap.
Whoa, what the heck?
Even if you're a big believer in the cryptids, I mean, let's be honest here. I think drugs were involved somewhere. No, I'm not going to completely ignore the strange and unusual and ridiculous. I do want to touch on a personal favorite of mine, although it's not a favorite because of plausibility. It's not that I believe in it, it's just really fascinating to me. So we're going to visit the small, quiet little Appalachian town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It sits along the banks of the Ohio River, right along the border with Ohio. At this point, there's a particular folk rock, I see it as country, but it's officially folk rock song that I would like to play, but for legal reasons, due to copyright, I can't.
Railroads, bring me home at the place I should be.
No, Pancake. That was beautiful singing, and I appreciate the effort at changing the lyrics, but I don't want to take any chances of getting in trouble. So there's mundane cryptids and there's weird cryptids, but then there's the Mothman. With the Mothman, weird comes to a whole new level. But it's because it's not just the weirdness of the creature itself, which by itself isn't very believable. It's all the other crap surrounding him. Now, I've complained about the hokey unprofessionalism of paranormal investigators and cryptid investigators, and I've seen hokey programs where these people went to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, going out in the wilderness looking for Mothman as if they were looking for Bigfoot. If you're expecting to find Mothman lurking around Point Pleasant now, you haven't done your Mothman research. To get an idea of what I'm on about, if you haven't seen the 2002 film, The Mothman Prophecies, definitely watch it. Even better, though, would be to read the book by the same name by John Keel. As a fan of the Mothman stuff, I've of course read the book and always highly recommended it to anybody that was interested in the Mothman. I had treated it like it was the supreme authority above everything else on Mothman stuff, like it was the Mothman Bible. Unfortunately, I don't remember where I seen it at, but it was suggested that there was some contradictions between what John Keel had wrote and received as information and what he actually put in his book. So I wasn't there whenever he interviewed people. I don't know what they told him and how it differs from what he put in his book. So now I am left wondering how authentic his telling is. But either way, it's an interesting read. And if you actually go through the book and see what all stuff was allegedly being experienced at the time, I mean, it's all over the place. We're talking not just the creature, but aliens, spaceships, men in black, weird supernatural paranormal types of experiences, people encountering people that look like people but somehow aren't people. The movie really just barely touches on any of this. It pretty well dives into the creepy supernatural elements of it while ignoring completely the aliens and the spaceships and the men in black. And heck, nobody even gets chased by the Mothman in the movie. Though it does do a very good job of depicting the Silver Bridge collapse. Now, I wasn't there at the time, but from what I gather, all the Mothman hysteria pretty much died down with the very real tragedy of the collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15th, 1967. There was heavy traffic on the bridge, weighing far more than the bridge was originally designed to carry. The bridge was built without redundancy, and just before sunset, an eye-bar broke, leading to the catastrophic failure of the entire structure and the loss of 46 lives. Now, an interesting and somewhat baffling side note here Usually Hollywood embellishes real events, but in this case they actually watered it down. The real-life Silver Bridge collapse took 46 lives, but in the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, only 36 perished. I'm not sure why they chose to play down the tragedy. Now, because of the timing of the Silver Bridge collapse, right next to all the other stuff that was going on, and the supernatural X-Files-y stuff dying down after the bridge collapse, the collapse of the Silver Bridge will forever remain linked to all the Mothman stuff. And in fact, if you swing by and visit Point Pleasant and visit the Mothman Museum, you'll find that it's not just full of Mothman stuff specifically, but also an awful lot about the Silver Bridge as well. A popular perspective or theory sees the Mothman as a sort of a bad omen, like he served as some kind of a warning about the impending bridge collapse, or maybe even caused it himself. Now, I like the bad omen, prophet of doom angle, at least in that it's definitely very interesting, but it's a theory that I don't personally subscribe to, mainly because of the lack of evidence. I need proof that such things exist. What I suspect really happened is that everything started with a handful of people being spooked by a misidentification of perhaps a sandhill crane. This channel has already previously covered the unreliability of our memories, the unreliability of our senses, our perception, or how our brain interprets the signals that it's receiving from its senses. These youths were spooked in the black of night out in the middle of the country. Then people talk, and remember, it's a small town. You end up getting a little bit of mass hysteria. Suddenly people's a little bit freaked out, a little bit on edge, and suddenly every mundane thing ends up becoming paranormal. And you have that mass hysteria persisting until it's swept away by a real tragedy that everybody had to deal with and changed everybody's lives forever. Alright, that ended on a little bit more of a downer than I'd like to finish on, with the tragedy and the lives lost. And I'd like to end on something a little bit more positive. All of us are more than just what we're born with, just our DNA. We're also shaped by all of our life experiences, the good ones and the bad ones. All of us will deal with things that aren't pleasant, difficult. But what's important is how we come out the other side of them, how we deal with them, and how we move on. And we have to keep picking ourselves up and keep moving forward. And Point Pleasant could have been brought down by this tragedy. They could have been ashamed of all the Mothman hysteria. But instead, the community has embraced that as part of their history, part of their community's personal story. That's part of their identity today. Yes, Mothman is interesting to me, but also, admittedly, I'm a little biased probably because Point Pleasant is pretty close to where I live. It's kind of like my local cryptid. And I have visited frequently, several times. Point Pleasant is just down the road from me, I don't know, a 45-minute drive. And it's a lovely little community. I mean, yeah, I've never lived there, but it seems like a nice, quiet little place. And every year they have a Mothman festival, and we enjoy going there. We always enjoy our trips to Point Pleasant. And if you happen to be in that area, please swing by and just check out the town, check out the museum. They have a Mothman statue. The community was also represented in Fallout 76, a video game that came out a handful of years ago. And Point Pleasant has embraced all that, and I love that for them. Just earlier in the year, me and my family was down there, and my son and I have played Fallout 76 together quite a bit, and he noticed and appreciated. He heard one of the shops down there playing some of the old-timey music that is in the Fallout 76 video game. And people go there not just during the festival. We were down there in the spring, and the festival's like every fall. And there were still people just making their own little personal pilgrimages down there, waiting in line to get a picture with the Mothman statue. And it's not just the Mothman stuff. They have all kinds of neat little shops there and stuff. But just down from there, there is a flood wall with murals painted with parts of their town's history. There's, of course, a little memorial to the unfortunate Silver Bridge. So they embraced all this and accepted it as part of who they are. And to me, it's a very positive take on everything that happened. And these are things that makes their community stand out from other communities. And I love to see this for people and for communities. Another town near here, just up the road in the other direction, I just found out they have a Bigfoot festival, apparently. So regardless of what our take is on cryptids, I'm personally not sold on them yet, but they're cool, they're fun, they're interesting, and I love to talk about them, and I am open to them. Maybe some more of these will turn out to be real, like, say, the kangaroo and the coelacanth we thought was extinct, and it turned out it's very well not extinct. So regardless of your personal take on these, it's cool to see communities that embrace these things. They're fun, and I feel like this is a happier note to end on. So thanks for watching, and hopefully you'll check out our next video.